The Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, May 16th, 2022, will please come to order, and I would request the clerk to please call the roll.
And as a reminder to all who are in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is absent at the moment. Mr. Schrein. Mr. Schrein is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker.
Here.
Ms. Turner.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Item number 3 on the agenda is public comment. Has anybody signed in?
Yes, Lou.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here right now, still under the afterglow from the meeting this morning at the CSU, hosted by our Center for Community Solutions. At least I can do better. I know the name of the organization rather than one of the panelists. However, it's bad news for me as well. I learned from that meeting that seems like county especially will distribute ARPA funds in the conventional way through the usual suspects. So right now, I will give you a big example, which you guys are kind of familiar with all the daytime opera, soap opera I have been telling you, reporting to you. Now, based on this report, the items you will have, this morning I actually heard for sure homeless shelter will have a certain dollar amounts to have upgrade of the buildings. But guess what? The money will go to whom? For example, Eden. But I have been reporting to you that Eden has been failed so many attempts to so-called improve the shelter building. The 2227 Payne Avenue. So if the money goes to them to improve the building, guess what will happen again? They have been since 2016, don't even go far, just from 2016. They have been hired contractors who could actually just park their vehicles on the street to get the parking tickets and just give it to Edens to pay. So the type of work it will happen will not actually benefit people who actually need a place in order to get themselves back together to be out of homelessness. So if we still stick to the traditional method, conventional channels, going through the not helpful entities, the ARPA funds will not really benefit the residents of our county. Now, I just use this homeless funding as an example. This also goes to lots of other projects as well. Today, you see, I'm sure you probably have not seen that. I always carry lots of these napkins. Why? Even shelter right now cannot solve the issues with toilet tissue. We have used these napkins to use bathrooms. So do you really think all these methods will work? Ideas are good, but without the input directly and also decision process not including the real people getting impacted directly, this will not work. Please don't waste the money on these people again. I'm talking about those middlemen ripping off the government. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have anybody else signed in?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And for the record, I'd like to note that Councilperson Schrein is in attendance. And the next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the May 2nd, 2022 meeting. Do we have a motion? So moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved by Councilman Tuma and seconded by Schrein to approve the minutes from May 2nd, 2022. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved from May 2nd. Matters referred to committee of a legislative nature are none. We have two presentations, and the first is from Maher Dussel, our county council ARPA consultant. We are very grateful to have you on board and appreciate your assistance, and I would ask if you could please introduce yourself and then continue with your presentation.
Hey, Mike Chambers with the Fiscal Office. Before they do their presentation, I just wanted to say a couple things. On April 26th, Director Parfiowicz filed with the federal government the county's revenue loss calculation of approximately $263,924,401, much more than what is our actual allocation. And this was revenue replacement funds were allocated to salaries and benefits for employees who provided government services. So our revenue loss calculation was, applied towards government services. And one of the things you'll note that obviously we hired Mara Dissel to review that, but also our external auditors, Clark Schaefer, has also reviewed it and have no issues with the way we've done that as well. Everything that will be presented, remember, we decided, even though it is ARPA money, it is no longer ARPA money because we already claimed it as revenue loss and provision of government services. So we submitted salaries and benefits totaling that $263 million. So that money right now is general fund dollars. What we did as a way to track everything is we wanted to call it General Fund American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, Revenue Replacement Provision of Government Services. It's really general fund. We did all of that so that we could keep track of the $239 million. But I want to make sure everyone understands we've already claimed it. It's already in the general fund. And with that, I would like to introduce Tim Morgus and Lori Lordo with Mar Dissel. They'll go through the presentation, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you.
Sure.
I believe we were going to have a PowerPoint slide deck up. Is that PowerPoint up?
I can't share right now. They disabled screen sharing. I have a note here. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you allow me to share my screen?
Yes, we're doing that right now. Give us a second.
Okay, hold on just a minute.
I'll just do a brief introduction. My name's Tim Morgus, and I have Lori Lordo with me. We're from the CPA firm of Mar Dissel, who is really headquartered in Pittsburgh, and we spend all of our time doing governmental and nonprofit auditing and consulting all year long. So we have about 100 and so people spread out throughout Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Maryland. And that's all we do. So we were engaged by the county to go over the ARPA funding as a consultant. So we put together a PowerPoint, and in the interest of time, I'll maybe slowly start us into the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay.
Can you see that now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next slide is, so today's guidance, as we've learned with any of this stimulus money, the money usually comes before the guidance. And that's the case with the ARPA money. Today's guidance is as May 16th, 2020. I'm sure there's more guidance to come, but going back, ARPA was signed into law March 11th, 2021, a $1.9 trillion package intended to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, $362 billion in federal fiscal recovery to state and local governments. And there was an interim rule, a final rule, and frequently asked questions are the main guidance at this point. for the money. The next slide will talk about what happened to the 130.2 billion. It was equally divided between counties, municipalities, and metropolitan cities. Metropolitan cities were basically any municipality with a population of more than 50,000 generally. And 65.1 billion was sent directly to counties from the federal government. All counties in the country were direct recipients. 45.57 was sent from the U.S. Treasury to the metropolitan cities, and 19.5 billion were sent to each municipality, and generally that ran through each state. So Ohio got the money and then divided it between the municipalities based upon a formula. So this money can be spent by December 31st, 2024. You don't necessarily have to have all the work done and the money out the door by then, but you need to have all the money obligated under contract by December 31st, 2024. And you have 2 more years to finish the work. So I think that's really an issue with Cuyahoga County, though. So the money was paid in 2 tranches. Don't confuse when you received the money to when the expenditures were incurred, because the timing can be different. You received 50% of your money at, I believe it was June of last year, and you should receive the other 50% in the next couple of weeks. They were evenly divided, 50% upfront, 50% in the second payment. Treasury recommends that you put the money into an FDIC insured account whenever possible. So I think you've satisfied that. U.S. Treasury ultimately responsible for the oversight of this money. The interim rule was dated May 10th, 2021, and the final rule was dated January 6th, 2022. Along with the final rule, there have been several questions and answers that have been posted by the U.S. Treasury that have given some guidance as well. So just remember, failure to comply with the restriction on this money will result in repayment back to the U.S. Treasury. There are 5 areas you can spend this money. It can be used for direct public support to the public health crisis. So the first would be allowable uses would be the common plexiglass, protective gloves, creating social distance for entranceways, those types of things, helping with video conferencing, etc. The next one is to address the negative impacts. It certainly allows the recipient to use the money to do its own stimulus in its own municipality, whether that be by household or via business. The next one talks about providing governmental services to the extent of reduction in revenue. That's the one that the county's money falls under. So you first have to establish that there was a revenue loss from the prior fiscal year to the year that the pandemic began. And then once you establish the revenue loss, you can use any governmental service against that revenue loss. So in the county's case, the revenue loss was approximately $263 million in year 1, and the entitlement was about $239 million. So your whole entire revenue loss was covered under the lost revenue in year 1. You actually can use that in future years as well, but in your case, it's not necessary because you get there in the first year. Number 4 is provide premium pay. The premium pay is pay that would be over and above to frontline workers that as a result of the pandemic. Number 5 would be infrastructure and water source, stormwater, or broadband infrastructure investments. There are some criterias that you have to meet, but it's pretty general in nature. So next slide, Lori.
Under the final rule, Treasury has given recipients two different options to determine the revenue loss. Recipients can elect a one-time standard allowance up to $10 million to spend on government services through the period of performance. They don't have to do a specific calculation to claim this allowance. Many of the smaller entities that we provide consulting services for have selected this option and are spending their money under government services under this new allowance. The second option to calculate revenue loss is, they can continue, recipients can continue to calculate the revenue loss according to the formula in the final rule, and that's the option that Cuyahoga County has selected. For their calculation, the county revenues at December 31st, 2020 were compared to base year revenues at December 31st, 2019. This calculation included all governmental and enterprise funds of the county. The calculation resulted in a revenue loss of approximately $264 million. County can spend up to the amount of their award, which was approximately $240 million on government services as a result of this calculation. Under revenue loss, money can be spent to fund government services on or after March 3rd of 2021. That's when this funding becomes effective. Treasury has defined government services as any service traditionally provided by the government, unless Treasury has stated otherwise. And in the next slide, I'll give you some examples of some unallowable activities. Funds that are spent under this government service are still subject to uniform guidance and federal procurement rules, and I'll get into that a little bit more later on. The unallowable activities under government services are really for any of the fiscal recovery fund or ARPA expenditures include the following. So you can't pay any debt, you can't pay any legal settlements, judgments, you can't set up a rainy day reserve account, you can't make a large contribution to try and fund your pension fund, you can't include pension expense as part of eligible payroll. You can't do anything that conflicts in regard to the ARPA statute or have any violations of awards or terms or conflicts of interest under uniform guidance. So it's pretty broad categories that they give there. The advantages to reporting under government service, there's a less administrative burden on staff, a lot less reporting requirements. Government service is the most flexible eligible use category. It's subject to streamlined reporting and compliance requirement. By reporting under government service, this will free up money to spend on other projects that may not have originally been eligible for ARPA funding. And the county did elect to report salaries and benefits under government services for the full amount of the award. This went from March 3rd of 2021 through March 31st of 2022. And the benefits reporting under salary and benefits, they're not subject to federal procurement rules. And Treasury has clearly stated in guidance that, salary and the related fringe benefits are allowable expenditure under this funding source. I know we kind of went through this presentation pretty fast. I wanted to leave some time for questions. And this is our contact information here if you would need to get a hold of us in the future.
Are there any questions by my colleagues?
Just
Ms.
a
Baker.
question. Can we get a hard copy of this presentation?
Sure, I can send it to the county.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilman Tron.
When we identify places that these funds can be utilized, is there any technique that has to be used to for distribution to identify whether this is as you put these on a scale and say, okay, there's only X amount of dollars to go around, is there any kind of measuring techniques that you have to do to weigh one idea over another?
You've already
Assuming they're all
identified-
qualified. What's that?
Go ahead. You've already identified the money to be spent on general government services, which is basically payroll that was paid during previous 2021 or the reporting period, I guess I should say, ending March 31st. And that covers money that was previously paid by the general fund. At this point, that money has been freed up, and how you spend it is up to the county. I think, Mike, if you want to.
So we're at complete liberty no matter what we want to do at this point in time, is what you're suggesting.
Since you've met the criteria of revenue loss and you've incurred and spent money under general government services, the money is yours to be spent within the confines of what the county is allowed to spend it on in the regular course of business.
Is there a time requirement that we have to spend it by?
No.
Okay, thank you.
If I can, Mike Chambers again, if I could just add, we are going to follow county procurement rules. I mean, Board of Control or County Council, depending upon the dollar amount. We also talked about the nomenclature we're going to use. Remember, this is general fund dollars, and just as you can spend general fund any way you so choose, this money is in that category. But we're also going to keep a report on our county website, kind of tracking, what we've committed to and where it is in the status. So that should be going on the website. But it is general fund dollars, just a reminder.
And I think in this case, there's a little nuance on how you reported the dollars as spent and how you're actually going to use the money going forward. So.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Ms. Baker.
So I'm a little confused if the dollars are ours to spend within the guidelines of county. What services are you giving to us, given that that process has already taken place, that we've gone through the ARPA qualifications of what we needed to do?
I think our services going forward will be limited to any reporting questions or any changes in ARPA guidance that may come up. And Lori, anything else you can think of? We're just here to help if you have a question. But as the money is the revenue recognition has been met and the report's been filed, I don't anticipate that we'll spend a lot of time going forward.
Hi, Becky Evie, Office of Innovation and Performance. Just wanted to follow up on your question, Councilwoman Baker. So the way our contract is set up, we are invoiced by Mardisel as they provide services. So we would only be paying for services rendered. So as Lori and Tim illustrated today, they were very supportive and instrumental in helping us get that final revenue loss calculation completed, as well as our quarterly report that was due on April 30th. And so throughout the funding timeline, so from when we receive these dollars until 2026 or 2027, we have to do quarterly reporting as well as an annual report as well. So they'll lend some help with that. They'll help with any auditing or any changes in Treasury guidance, but they'll only be paid for those services that they are actually asked to perform by us.
So if I may, so there is still quarterly financial reports that are needed through still the ARPA dollar. I mean, right. So we're not done as far as reporting for the ARPA
From a
services.
reporting standpoint, yes.
Yes, what? Yes.
That we still have to submit a quarterly report, even though we've exhausted those dollars. Lori and Tim can probably provide some additional clarification on that too with the quarterly reporting.
Yeah, the guidance really hasn't stated that you need to stop doing the quarterly filings if you have all your money spent. We would anticipate that they start thinking about that as it happens, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to file a final report soon. But as of now, the guidance says you have to keep filing a report even if there's no activity or limited activity. So we'll be happy to help with that.
Just one quick follow-up then.
Please continue.
Mike, what do you anticipate the need for this consulting firm from moving forward? Do you see yourself really calling upon them for much of?
I'll be honest with you, not really. I mean, it's nice to have. I mean, it doesn't hurt us to keep them there. Maybe we can decertify some of the funds. But I mean, in the beginning, when we started this process, there was a lot of uncertainty. We had calculated revenue loss ourselves internally. You know, there was always, situations, but it was great to have an outside firm come in and take leadership on it. There could be some changes coming down, but we've already claimed it all. So I think our reporting's going to be pretty much the same thing again. But it certainly doesn't hurt to have them there as an option. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, our external auditors who are auditing us on behalf of the state has went through this and reviewed it and found no issues with it either. So that's, it's a further accomplishment there.
Thank you, Chair.
Anything else? Okay, well, we would like to thank you for presenting today and thank you for your service, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
All right, take care.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye.
Okay, we will now move on to the second item on our agenda, which is the presentation on the council's first quarter financial results and projections for the remainder of the year.
Good afternoon.
Parfiowitz.
Walter Parfiowitz from the Fiscal Office, Office of Budget and Management. Thank you for the opportunity to present the first quarter report. Overall, good report across the board. Revenues are projected slightly higher than budget, while overall spending is projected slightly under budget. As of first quarter, we have a small operating deficit in the general fund, and surplus in the Health and Human Services levy fund. Revenues and expenditures in both operating funds are projected to end favorably, and the ending cash balances are projected to exceed our required reserves. So just some quick highlights from first quarter. We issued bonds for Progressive Field. We appropriated opioid mitigation funds for 2022. We appropriated general fund for the criteria architect for the new corrections center. We spent the remainder of the CARES Act funds. We claimed, as you heard earlier, $263 million in revenue loss and appropriated the first $120 million in ARPA funding. And finally, we appropriated $4.1 million for veteran services for their 2021 underspending to the Veteran Services Fund. So with that, I'll just start with the general fund overall. For 2022, the general fund is projected to end with a small operating deficit of $4.3 million. This includes the two items that were not originally budgeted. The $4 million subsidy for the criteria architect and the $4.1 million transfer to the Veteran Services Fund. If we take these two items out, we actually end up with a surplus of $3.8 million. So next we'll look at general fund revenue. For 2022, the general fund revenue is projected to total $614.4 million. This is $6 million or 1% more than our budget. And you can see the larger variances are in charges for services, interest earnings, intergovernmental revenue, other revenue, and sales taxes. Just to go over the categories with the larger variances. Charges for services is projected to total $93.5 million. It's 2.7 or 3.1% over budget. Majority of the surplus is in Board of Elections revenue and higher sheriff/jail fees that are collected as well. Interest earnings projected at $9.8 million, which is about $2 million or 25.7 over budget. Interest has been coming in better than what we anticipated. Intergovernmental revenue projected at $58.5 million, which is $4 million or 7.4 over the budget. This includes primarily Public Defender, Local Government Fund, which are both projected to come in higher than budget. Other revenue projected at $112.4 million, which is $8 million or 6.6% under budget. This budget, if you recall, we did budget a $10 million transfer from the levy back to the general fund this year, so that budgeted transfer is not included in this projection. Creates the majority of the deficit here. Sales taxes are projected to total $300 million, which is $4.6 million or 1.5% over budget. So I'll tell you, sales tax collections through March averaged about $25.8 million. In fact, I believe it was March that came in gross sales taxes to the county of just under $30 million, the highest month that I think the county's ever seen. So the projection for the remainder of the year assumes that roughly $25 million in sales taxes are deposited into the general fund for the rest of the year. General fund expenditures projected to total $639.8 million, which is $20.2 million or 3.1% under budget. Personnel services projected to total $291.3, which is $1.9 million or just 0.6% over budget. Other expenditures projected to total $271.3 million, which is $18.5 million or 6.4% under budget. And subsidies are projected to total $77.2 million, which is $3.6 million or 4.4% under budget. So the next slide, I just want to give you a sense of where the larger variances exist. So these aren't all the variances, these are just the larger ones. So we're detailing here what the departments that contributed to the $20.2 million general fund surplus. The majority of the departments have projected surpluses. Three are currently projected to end with deficits, but two of the deficits, Economic Development and Board of Elections, will be resolved after council approved appropriations post in the month of April. So the only true deficit is in the sheriff's office. The sheriff is projected to end the year at $2.7 million deficit, most of which is in personal services. In the first quarter, the sheriff has added 30 corrections officers, but overtime is up about 41% over the same time last year. So we anticipate that the additional hiring overtime will level off and the deficit will come back in line with the budget by the end of the year. I do have some notes here that the sheriff has 629 of the 690 budgeted corrections officers on staff, and he has monthly hiring events scheduled for each and every month of this year through December to try and staff up on corrections officers. So general fund subsidies projected at $77.2 million. I think you saw that on a slide earlier. It's $3.6 million or 3.2% under budget. This slide has the three subsidies that are causing the variance. The first item is the Hilton Hotel. The Hilton Hotel covered their portion of the debt this year, the county hotel debt, saving the county about $10.8 million. We budgeted for that as a backup, finding that we don't need it. The Criteria Architect was subsidized at $4 million, which basically put us down $4 million, and then the Veteran Services transfer of $4.1 million was an additional add to the subsidy. So the net effect was roughly the $3.6 million. So the two reserves we had on our schedules, we had two reserves totaling $8.1 million. One was for the county hotel capital of about $7 million, and the other was $1.1 million guarantee for the Flats East Bank project. Neither of these items are projected to be paid in 2022. Ending cash balance. So we started the year at $209.5 million. Operating revenue projected at $614.4. Operating expenditures projected at $562.6 million. Subsidies and other funds projected to total $77.2. And the projected ending cash balance is projected to total $184.1 million. The ending cash balance is $59.5 million higher than the cash reserve requirement of $124.6 million. So we're projecting to end the year in compliance with our code requirement. Questions about the general fund?
Questions about the general fund? I have a couple questions about the general
Certainly.
fund. The first one is that even though by just a small amount, it's unusual to find personnel costs exceeding the budget amount. And my question does that reflect that we're starting to have more success in filling vacancies?
I believe it does begin to show that, but as we fill vacancies, these departments, especially the sheriff's office, are still working overtime, which is causing an issue. So once people come on board and they're staffed up and trained, the overtime should subside.
And the second question is on the slide that you have in front of us. It reflects a budgeted amount of more than a $50 million reduction in cash balance, and I didn't remember that we budgeted for a deficit that large. And my question is whether this includes artifacts and timing issues.
Yes, it does. Councilman Miller, this has the impact of what was approved as a transfer of revenue from the ARPA fund to the general fund. That transfer was $98.8 million, I believe, but the appropriations were budgeted at full value of $120 million. So artificially, we have basically a $21 million deficit if you look at it that way. But the numbers, when it comes to, from a budgetary perspective, when we're looking at budget variances, what we have included in the numbers are the $98 million of revenue, and in the projection, we also have the $98 million of revenue. In the expenses, we have $120 million of appropriations in both the budgeted and projection columns. So the variances are not impacted at all by the ARPA revenue. It's just the deficit that's impacted by it.
So, was the beginning cash balance of $209,483,000 actually artificially high?
It was. It had $21 million of ARPA revenue transferred in at the end of last year. So think of it this way. We had $21 million transferred in 2021, and the remaining $98 million transferred in 2022. But in 2022, we appropriated the $420 million.
So
Timing issue.
So you actually could think of the beginning cash balance as more like 188.
That would be correct.
And if you subtract the $4 million projected deficit, that gets us to the 184.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Other questions, Councilman Tron?
Just following up on the chairman's first question. You alluded that it's the hiring of a number of open vacancies, but I can only assume that the county is no different than what we're doing and we see in our business, is that the hiring is requiring us to hire at a much higher dollar value than what that position was being paid for even 6 months or a year ago. Are we seeing that in the county also?
Councilman Strawn, I can't answer that question. I'd have to check in with HR, tell you the truth.
I can only imagine that if we're hiring for salaried positions, you're not going to be able to hire people today for what you could hire them for a year or two ago.
And I would agree with you, yes.
Thanks.
Anything else?
Just one question, if you don't mind.
Yes, Councilwoman Baker.
The sales tax that was much higher than anticipated, can you give any explanations for that?
Actually, Councilwoman Baker, I really don't have an explanation for that. The only thing that we see from the Ohio Department of Taxation are the final numbers that in our portion, statewide it was up for everyone.
So if we met our budget and not or met our, what we thought we were going to get, we would actually be another 4,500 less,
Less,
which
correct.
would make a considerable difference in this outlook.
Absolutely.
Any projections for the next quarter, or?
Well, the next quarter is projected basically at the first quarter's average. So we're projecting the remainder of the year to come in about $25 million each month.
So,
Good news, it'd just be nice to know why.
so I think I can offer one reason why, and that's simply inflation. If inflation is currently going up at 6% a year, which it's currently probably at least that much, well, that means everything that people buy that we charge sales tax on, well, those things are going up in price, and so we're getting more sales tax. And if people are buying the same amount of stuff, well, then the sales tax collection is going to go up by 6% just because of inflation. So I think that's going to account for part of it.
Well, on the other hand, if I may, I mean, a lot of people are holding back on purchases. They're not buying the big ticket items, the cars, and housing, and
Well, that
food is not taxed. So I think they're cutting back on what they're spending. But I hear what you're saying, the necessities certainly have to be spent.
well, that is the concern going forward. We'll certainly see evidence for or against that notion as the GDP numbers come out from the federal government reports.
Thank you.
Yeah, the one thing I can add is that the high month, the $30 million sales tax month, that was the month that represented December of 2021. So we're always like 3 months behind. So the holidays there probably played into it as well.
Anything else on the general fund? Please continue.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to just move right into the Health and Human Services Levy Fund. So for 2022, the Health and Human Services Levy Fund projected to end with an operating surplus of $16.5 million. So this includes operating revenue of $285.9 million and operating expenditures and subsidies totaling $269.3 million. Same process. I'll go over the revenue and then I'll go over the expenditures and subsidies. So the Health and Human Services Levy revenue projected to total $285.9 million, 9.3 million or 3.4% over the budget. So we have two revenue categories here on the Health and Human Services Levy side. We have intergovernmental revenue. It's projected to total 15.6 million, roughly 1 million or 6.1% under budget. This is the homestead exemption. The second item is property taxes, projected to total 270.4 million, which is 10.3 million or 4% over the budget. So here I can tell you that the 2022 property tax budget was flat from last year, but the 2022 first half collections came in at $5.4 million higher than in the same period last year. 2.6 million in new property tax valuations and roughly 2.8 million in delinquent property tax collections. So those two items doubled, basically comes up with the variance there, almost $10 million. Or is it more than $10 million?
So, Director,
Yeah.
can you explain a little bit why the intergovernmental is coming in 6% under budget?
That one, Councilman Miller, that one I have the biggest issue with is that I truly can't get back to that number as to why it's coming in less than. The property tax collection's higher, but the homestead exemption lower. Potentially that we budgeted it to be too high. The Health and Human Services Levy expenditures and subsidies are projected to end at $269.4 million, which is $9.5 million or 3.4% under budget. The other expenditures are the tax collection fees on the two levies, essentially, projected to end $1 million higher than budget, and the subsidies are projected to end at $264.5 million, which is roughly $10.5 million or 3.8% under budget.
And Director,
Yes.
why are the tax collection fees 25% over budget?
I believe those are the fees that are charged, by the various departments for collecting the property tax revenue. So the property tax revenue is higher, and it adjusts the fees as well. They're not fixed.
Okay.
So same way that I portrayed this on the general fund side, these are the larger HHS departments that contributed to the variance. So we have a $10.5 million surplus. As you saw, the larger surpluses are in Health and Human Services Administration, the Child Support Department, the Small Office of Early Childhood, and the $10 million budgeted but not projected repayment to the general fund. The surpluses in Health and Human Services Administration and Child Support are due to vacancies. The Early Childhood surplus is underspending in the UPK program. And obviously, the $10 million repayment to the general fund is not included in our projections. We do have a deficit, however. It's in the Children and Family Services area. The deficit is projected at $6.5 million. And it's primarily due to the recently approved 5% rate increases for board and care and the emergency placement contracts for children in county custody. Health and Human Services levy fund ending cash balance. So we started the year with a balance of $31.7 million. We have operating revenue projected to total $286 million. Other expenditures and subsidies projected to total $269.4 million, leaving an ending cash balance of $48.2 million at this time. The projected ending cash balance is $21.4 million more than the cash reserve requirement, and we are projected to end the year in compliance with our county code requirement of 10%. Questions about the Health and Human Services levy fund?
I have one question.
Ms. Baker?
So the variance of the ending cash balance of 18 million, would that be 8 million if we were to transfer those dollars out and put back in the general fund?
That is correct.
So if I may, so our variance were really higher than what we anticipated, even without the 10 million.
That is correct.
May I ask for a reason for that? Why are we higher? Why aren't we on task of what we thought we were going to spend?
It's primarily underspending in these areas. These are subsidies, so these aren't the full budgets for the Health and Human Services departments. These are just the subsidies.
Right.
Majority of the HHS budgets are supported with state and federal revenue. The levy subsidizes only the differential. So just as they're underspending their budgets, this is the remnant effect of that.
Okay, thank you.
Director, along that line, we had a very substantial discussion about the number of social workers at DCFS. That probably got more discussion than any personnel item except for corrections officers. And you noted that DCFS is over budget because of contractual changes. Do you have any information as to how we're doing on hiring social workers and whether we're tracking above or on or below target?
I do, Councilman. I have the vacancy numbers that I'd like to share, but I'd like to do that in the all funds section.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Any other questions on HHS? Okay, please continue.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to move into the all funds revenue section. So Revenue, when you consider an all funds basis, it's projected to total $1.64 billion this year. It's 38.4 million, or just 2% over budget. The major contributors, two of the items we just heard about, the general fund has a $6 million surplus. The Health and Human Services Levy Fund has a $9.3 million revenue surplus. But there are some others here as well. Children's Services Fund has a small $2.4 million surplus. It's primarily due to projected federal Title IV reimbursements. Due to the rate increases, we'll collect some additional funding on those expenditures from Title IV. The Real Estate Assessment Fund has a small surplus of about $1.3 million, and then the Capital Projects Fund has a $14.3 million surplus. That surplus exists primarily because that area was not budgeted with revenue. So now that revenue is there, it appears as if it's a surplus.
And what's the source of that revenue?
Projects that we choose to fund. Could be a variety of sources.
Okay, fine.
Small numbers in the grand scheme of things, 38.4 million, 2.4% based on $1.6 billion. On the expenditure side, expenditures projected to total 1.67 billion, 105.5 million, or 5.9% under budget. Surpluses all resulted from vacancies, underspending, in other expenditures. Major contributors as well here, you can see that's general fund for their portion of things we've already discussed, 33.6 million. The Health and Human Services Levy Fund, $9.5 million, again, what we discussed earlier. But then we have additional surpluses. The fiscal office has a $23.2 million surplus that is neither general fund or levy. It's $11 million for the county hotel that was not needed. There's $1 million surplus in the DTAC, the Delinquent Real Estate Assessment Fund. And there's $5 million surplus in REA due to payments that will not have to be made for the Harris Real Property System. Additional surpluses in the Human Services Fund. Councilman Miller, your questions, all due to vacancies. Child support officers, there's 47 vacant positions. Social workers at DCFS, there's 124 vacant positions. Social workers at DSAS, 43 vacancies. And caseworkers at Job and Family Services of 108 vacancies. So I think our numbers that we present here are potentially light when it comes to surpluses.
How many vacancies did you say at DCFS?
124.
Okay, that's a pretty high number.
124, Councilman Miller, and we did, as you recall, I think during the budget time, we did add 20 or so, if I'm not mistaken. We also had surpluses in both road and bridge and sanitary sewer. $25.8 million surplus in road and bridge, $9.9 million projected surplus in sanitary. And, these are things that appear every year. These are timing projects, all projects due to timing that wind up with surpluses. The last item is a $3.8 million deficit as well in the sheriff's office on an all funds basis. It's primarily due to hiring additional protective services staff. These are not deputies. These are not corrections officers. They're protective services staff. They continue to work overtime as well as they bring people in. There are also increased costs for the county's camera system, weapons, ammunition, and uniforms were the variance explanations that I was provided with. So on an all funds basis, ending cash, started with $1.1 billion in cash. Revenue is projected to total 1.6. Expenditures 1.6, and our ending cash balance will remain about $1.1 billion. Questions?
And again, how much did you say on money that we don't have to pay to Harris?
About $5 million.
Questions by my colleagues? So, Director, the Federal Reserve has gotten very aggressive about raising interest rates. Do you have an estimate on do you think actually our income and also the fact that our all funds cash balance has grown, do you think these are going to combine to produce an income level that's even higher than the current projection? Do you think that's likely?
I believe it is likely, Councilman Miller. I think that this is just first quarter, so we've just seen the beginning of this.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for the report.
You're very welcome.
I think we're on track in most respects. My biggest concern would be being light on personnel for HHS. You know, that's partly why we're $8 million to the good, despite the even not counting the repayment. But that's maybe not totally a good thing, and we may have to redouble our efforts to try to get those positions filled so the children can be protected. But financially, we're doing well at this time, and I appreciate the update, and we'll continue to monitor things closely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to miscellaneous business. Does anybody have any of that? Hearing none, and there being nothing further that holds our attention, Finance and Budgeting Committee stands adjourned. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Sounds like we probably could figure that on our own, but if you want to confirm it, okay, I get you. Well, and then